so much for coming and welcome to Wonderland. We're thrilled to have you all here. We just hit our 6-month mark. And I'm so thrilled to have both Lonnae and Steve, who, little blast from the past from our days at the Washington Post. So thank you both for coming. So tonight we've got Lonnae O'Neal, who is a senior writer for Anscape, formerly known as The Undefeated. And prior to that, she was a Washington Post reporter and columnist for more than 2 decades. She's the author of I'm Every Woman, remixed stories of marriage, motherhood, and work, as well as the book that she's here to talk about tonight. I can't wait to hear more about it. Bibb Country, Unearthing My Family Secrets of Land, Legacy, and Lettuce, which was just released last week. And doing all the good questioning tonight is Steve Reiss, who's a veteran newsroom manager. He was a longtime Washington Post editor, and Steve is a former executive editor of culture and enterprise at Anscape. So I'm going to let them take it away. They're going to do questions for about a half hour, and then we can do some Q&A.
So, Lonnae's been working on this book for 6 years.
Yeah, the first story came out in 2019.
And it's been a long road, but a powerful one. And we've been on this journey together, and so I'm really excited to share this, and the fact that it's out in the world is bringing me great joy, and I hope that you all will enjoy it too. So this book has its origins in a unusual family reunion.
That's right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that reunion and what it felt like to go there?
Right. And it's neat for Steve to ask me that, because he was there when I got the invitation. So there was an invitation, and thank you so much. I'm just delighted to be here with you. There was an invitation kicking around Facebook back in 2019, summer of 2019, inviting the descendants of a guy named Major Richard Bibb from Russellville, Kentucky, civil Revolutionary War veteran, and the descendants of the people he enslaved and emancipated, right? And they were having a reunion. By the time it reached me, I probably got to it a few months. I'm not on Facebook often and all of that. And so I get this reunion. I'd never known anything about this history. I had never, my grandmother was Susie Bibb, but I had never sort of thought about or contemplated or wondered about the white Bibbs. And so I get this invitation, and my first thought, well, it wasn't a thought really, it was a stream of percussive curse words, right? That I immediately went into my editor's office and just started rhythmically cursing. And, oh, that's some right there. Oh, they can deuces on them plantation happenings. Like, I was not a happy person. I didn't want to hear this history. I hadn't sought it out. And so it just found you, right? So enslavement, slavery, this history just found me and attached itself like a barnacle to my grandmother in my mind, right? And I was like, the last thing I wanted to do was go to this reunion. I was full of shade and all of this. And at one point, because you start getting follow-ups, I started probably crying or something. And, Steve Reiss has seen it all before. It's just, just Tuesday or something like that in the newsroom. And he says, I know you're not interested in going. I know, but now you are a writer. You could go and write about it. And I let that, I sat with that for a while, because that was a way to go and under my own agency, right? Because what was so frightening and so heavy was this power imbalance. I was on the shoulders falling down like teardrops side of a power dynamic, right? But having a notebook in my hand would level the playing field a little bit, right? It would allow me to go have my own voice, right? So I'm not just coming as a descendant of, and this is my framing at the time, I'm not just coming from slavery into this reunion, right? I'm coming again with my own agency and my own notebook. And so that is how I came to the story. And I don't know if that was what I don't know if you saw that immediately or if it took you some time to see the story possibilities in that. You do have a reputation for being diabolical, so perhaps.
I was working on a couple of different levels.
Right, that's right, but it worked.
So you wrote about that reunion for what was then the Undefeated, a division of ESPN that focused on the Black experience. How did writing for the Undefeated affect your approach, as opposed to, say, writing for the Washington Post, where you had been for many years? For those who don't know, the Undefeated was a startup within ESPN. It was a majority Black newsroom, and its purpose was to focus on the intersections of sports, race, and culture. So this was solidly within the mission statement for the site, but it was a different space
Indeed.
than one where you had spent 2 decades?
Yeah, my entire career. The Washington Post formed me, shaped me, taught me how to write, or taught me and helped teach me how to think, and help turn me into a writer and polish and all of that. And you were at the Post and you edited a lot of my pieces. Deb Heard. In fact, I look out and I see these editors around me. It feels a little nightmarish. As a reporter, sometimes I'll try not to slip into that. But it's a really good question, because what I found going from the Post to the Undefeated was that I could write in the same language I thought in, right? There was a layer of translation that I did not have to do, and wasn't dependent. I had amazing editors and fantastic editors, but being sort of cocooned in Black thought, right? So the translation, the first things that came out of my head, I was able to socialize them. I was able to talk about them. I was able to, bring up these things without worrying that I was running afoul of some line, and it was invisible. I had internalized it. It's not like anybody was telling me not to write this. It was that my starting place was different, right? And I could tell stories that were every bit as valid to the American experience, but they were simply undertold. In some cases, they were not simply undervalued. It's sort of bigger than that. They weren't known, right? And even despite the best efforts of a lot of people to surface those, as the world, and it was 2016, so as things were getting more and more complex, I found myself very, very hungry and needing to be incubated in a little bit different, sort of thought. Like I said, I can't say it any better than that. It was being able to write in the language that I think in, and have that edited back if need be. And I was able to do that plenty of times, but it at the Post, depending on the editor, right? And if you're not always translating, you can actually go further in a story.
Talk about that a little. What does that mean?
Well, because you only have so much energy for any project, right? And if you have to start, 10 feet before sea level, explaining your concept, explaining why you think it's important, setting a stage, framing it up in a way that the people you're pitching it to will even understand that it's a story, let alone be able to pull it out of you, right? Because that's what I need from an editor as well, right? So that takes away 20-30% of the energy I have just from the beginning, right? And so by not having to do layers of translation, even, with you, we're incubated in Black thought. It's like forest bathing, except Black. right? And so you're just able to go deeper and also go higher, and have the sense that if someone disagrees or if something doesn't land, you're a little bit clear that it's not because it's your worldview that's being challenged. It's more that, something doesn't work. And so I just found that I've done, to my mind, some of my best writing in my career. Most of it, actually, at The Undefeated. And, I haven't written really in a while for Anscape, so I'm just going to say The Undefeated.
So one of the storylines in this book is about the creation of this exotic foodstuff, Bibb lettuce, and how it illustrates the different inheritances of
Indeed.
the white Bibbs and the black Bibbs.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Right. So up until 2019, I didn't know there was any such thing as white Bibbs, right? So I am sure I had heard, like, what? Right? I thought Bibbs only came in black. I am sure I had heard of Bibb lettuce, because when I heard it, it was instantly familiar. And my grandmother's maiden name was Susie Bibb. And never for a nanosecond did I ever connect the two or think to wonder. I said in the book it's because of how very different the cultural vernacular was. And my grandparents owned a restaurant, and I still had, but this was smothered pork chops and rib tip sandwiches and chicken and dumplings. This was soul food and heavy food and rich food and all of that. So when I'm finding out about this lettuce, one of the things that sort of strikes me, this delicacy, this heirloom garden darling lettuce, right, that is sort of the epitome of high-end restaurants. And if you say heirloom garden darling, already you're talking about something a little bit more way removed from,
I'm talking about something white.
Yeah, let's just say that. Right. Let's just say that part, right? But you're also talking about more than that. You're talking about a family whose wealth was foundational to America, while my grandmother grew up not just poor, but hungry, right? And she was a Bibb. So in all of it, I said this to you once, it was like I was playing ragtime. I'm listening to two different time signatures about the same story, right? And so the white Bibbs, again, John Bigger Bibb, who developed Bibb lettuce, enslaved my fourth great grandmother, right? And one of the things that was always hanging around the reunion too was we were not only told we were descended from the people John Bigger Bibb and Major Richard Bibb and George Mortimer Bibb enslaved, but that we also might be directly descended from them, right? And so this was a whole lot coming at me, and I took it out to your chagrin on Bibb lettuce at one point, right? About the chapter where you were telling me the chapter was basically you hated it.
I just thought you hadn't thought it through fully.
Right. Because I wrote a whole ass chapter on Bibb lettuce, and I give it to Steve, and he's like, okay, we got germination, we got, horticultural, we got, how this is cultivated, we got a whole lot of Kentucky Derby in there. There's no lettuce in your lettuce chapter. I was like, that's because I've never tasted it. And he was like, you wrote a whole chapter about lettuce, Bibb lettuce, and you've never tasted it. I went back to the ancient Egyptians with the goddess of fertility and all of this kind of stuff. And I was standing on principle, right? I took it as a matter of pride. Like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to taint it with this enslavers, whatever. And he just looked at me. He's like, Lonnae, there's a hole in your story. And I was crushed. There's nothing worse. Well, there are worse things you can say to reporters, but that's really bad. It was like, he's like, you've done this whole story. There's a hole in it. Go taste the lettuce. And so I took your advice and I went on this odyssey.
Tell us about how it wasn't easy to find, actually.
It was not easy to find. I'm looking for Bibb lettuce on, menus, and there was one, it had been on there for Restaurant Week in DC, but it got taken off. And so at some point, well, the first thing I did, actually, before I did that, was I decided that I was going to just go find some in the world, right? So I'm looking at Whole Foods and, Trader Joe's and everything, and they had a butter lettuce, which is a type of Bibb lettuce, or Bibb is a type of butter lettuce, actually. And so I'm in the aisle at Whole Foods, but then I start remembering everything I've read about how you have to dress it lightly, and you can't smother it in this heavy dressing, and what it pairs with. And I'm nobody's foodie. My second column for the Washington Post said something to the effect of, I like lunch by the pound and vending machine tuna. So this is what I'm bringing to the table, right? And so I'm in the aisle and I started kind of feeling sophisticated, right? So I'm reading all these dressings, and I became very impressed because they had a lot of vowels in them, which made it feel, very sophisticated. And at one point I was like, yeah, here was a parsley vinaigrette, and it's got the A in it. And then I wrote in the book, and then I got home and I looked up how to spell vinaigrette, and it's spelled with an A, so that was less than a win, than I thought it was. And so anyway, I just got overwhelmed after I came back with $30, $40, $50 worth of lettuce byproducts. And so then I just went to to looking it up in the, for looking for it in menus, and I found it at McCormick and Schmick's. And I remember the first time I tasted it, and I was like, oh, I get what it's about. I get what all the fuss is about. It was very nearly creamy, right? It was velvety. It was so textured and so flavorful, except, and this is how I make a turn in that chapter, I was like, except I wonder if it was grown hydroponically, in which case I'm not getting all the notes. And so that's where I ended up, right? I'm still not a foodie, but that I can talk about, right?
So
you got a kick out of that chapter.
I did. I loved your adventure in search of Bibb lettuce.
Right.
And I hadn't realized that it was so hard to find, which was...
It's a regional. It doesn't travel well, and I write about that as well. It had national aspirations, but after salad bars, at Wilton salad bars, it doesn't hold in, it has to be packaged very specially. And then, Kentucky folks. Are there any Kentucky folks here? Because I'm about to savage Kentucky. Then, so after that, they just really became very proprietary about it, and that adds a patina of sophistication and everything, and to counterbalance some other stuff that goes on in Kentucky and its history, which I also write about.
So you mentioned your grandmother, Susie Bibb, and she's one of the central characters in this story, a very strong woman and one who influenced you in many ways. And you sketch this portrait of her at home. So share with us that portrait of her, how she's dressed, and where she's at.
Right. How she's dressed is easy because for most of my childhood, my grandmother didn't get dressed. She sat in her pajamas and she loan sharked from a green armchair in her pajamas, where I spent every summer of my childhood, and a steady stream of people came in to stand in front of Susie O'Neal. and they called her baby, right? It wasn't just a term of endearment that my grandfather called her. They called her baby because she had been named Susie. My great-great-grandfather had apparently named him after his girlfriend, and his wife didn't like that, so she stopped referring to her at all. She just called her baby, and so the baby stuck. And not only was she baby, so then people would call her Ain't Baby, right? It was like she got all the So anyway, oh, Miss Baby, baby, I need money for the baby needs formula, the baby needs diaper. I need to get my car fixed. Can I borrow $50 and I'll give you $70 back when I get paid? And if the interest rates weren't to her liking, she'd be like, no, I don't have it today. And she would just sit back, and then they'd be like, can I borrow $50 and I'll give you $100 back when I get paid? And she would get up in her pajamas and go in the bedroom that I never ever saw her share with my grandfather, and go under the mattress and come out with money. Sometimes the terms were these usurious, interest rates, but sometimes they were food stamps or any other form of payment or barter, right? My grandmother, not unlike a lot of black women, was a feature in the underground economy of this railroad town of Centralia, Illinois, in southern Illinois. And when you said I spent a lot of time with her, I don't know about other folks' childhood, but there is a chain of custody. And when you go, because this was South, we lived in Chicago, when you go someplace south of Chicago to visit relatives, and you're very young, and all the older kids are out able to do what older kids are doing, you're sitting there with your grandmother and you're watching the stories every day, all day. Price is Right, stories, all of that. I was a bookworm, so I'd be reading or whatever, and so I was eyewitness to this steady stream of folks coming in and out. And she had a lot of wits and wisdom, mostly. She was she would call out advice like, keep your legs closed, into the phone, right? Well, she ought not to lay down with him then. And I'm just listening to all of this, and always go to school, go to school, go to school. It was drilled into her head. And for the time, she had 9 grandchildren, and we all went to college, right? And all but one graduated, and the one who didn't was probably the smartest out of everybody. But doctors, lawyers, double-degreed folks, right? This, to me, is the most enduring way her legacy lasted, right? It was messianic, almost, her belief in education and what it could do for black folks.
She was somewhat frustrated in her own aspirations.
She absolutely was. She had been the only one of her siblings to graduate from high school and had always been smart in math, hence the loan sharking, right? And by the way, by loan sharking, she never used any muscle. She never had anybody come after anybody. Well, okay, a couple of nephews would drive her around, still in her pajamas, and she would, maybe call out after them in the street. But if somebody didn't pay her back, they simply weren't able to borrow from her again, right? And so, yeah. My grandfather, last thing real quick, she used to work in the confectionery. It was called the confectionery. It was called O'Neal's Place. And imagine being a kid and walking in O'Neal's Place and getting to go behind the bar. It was very cool, So I maybe remember her behind the bar sort of once. She took to her pajamas very young in mind. Like I was maybe 6 when she permanently took to her pajamas. But she would be in there and she wouldn't wait on people if her stories were on. So it would be on television and she simply would refuse to wait on people until a commercial, right? And her daughter, my Aunt Jackie, wouldn't wait on you if she didn't like you. So my grandfather just once was like, baby, I would just rather you go home and watch your stories and, So after that, yeah.
She got dispensation.
Right, exactly.
That's probably what you wanted.
Exactly,
Anyway.
exactly. And that's when the loan sharking really picked up.
So, you mentioned in the book that in many ways this is a ghost story, and that your ancestors, they had things they needed to say, and what do you mean by it's a ghost story, and what were they saying to you?
Oh my gosh. So, the first way I thought it was a ghost story, from the very beginning, there were all these there were these coincidences that kept coming at me, and I don't actually believe in coincidences. I think things happen in ways that, are not immediately known, but can be felt. So I pull up to Russellville, Kentucky, to a house on Morgan Street, which is the same street I grew up on. Okay, that's fine. In Chicago, right. The exchange of the documentary filmmaker was the same phone number I had. John Bibb died on my birthday. His wife was born on my mother's birthday. Just all these things. I got a book up South from America. The Imani Perry book came to me. Amazon. I open up the box and open the book, and it falls open to the narrative of Henry Bibb, right? But then it got deep, and then there's just more stuff. I literally was going to make a chapter called Breadcrumbs, right? But I'm reading this history, right? And it's crawling inside me. There's these documents, the United States slave schedules and tax records and descriptions of my ancestors as the usual color of Negroes, right? And there was a woman, my fourth great grandmother, her name was, she's called in the record Old Keziah. And so maybe about a year and a half in, I was reading something about her, and it came to me. I was like, nobody would call their grandmother or their great-grandmother old anything, especially nobody black, right? So I made a switch in my mind. I called her Mama Keziah. And when I did that, it changed the world for me. Like, for the first time since I had ever heard of any such thing as a white Bibb, I had not lost my ancestors to slavery. I wasn't losing them. I was gaining a big mama, right? A woman who could name me, and who with every step she took along the Cumberland Trail, right, imagined me, thought me up, conjured me, fortified me. And that was just because I was able to claim her, right? So then the history became more mine. And then I started to escape the shackles of it, right? The very thing I didn't want to go to the reunion about, right? I started getting distance on that, and then racehorse distance on that, right? And it changed. The ghosts, they were still sending me little messages and signs. NBC did a story out of the Equal Justice Initiative where they had a wall with the last names of formerly enslaved that the formerly enslaved took, and a wall of thousands of names, right? And NBC centers in on Bibb. I was like, and I started being like, I hear you, Mama Keziah. I'm gonna keep going. So yeah.
So let's bring it back from Mama Keziah to the present day, which you do in the book, and you do it especially in a chapter that's titled "Beware of Becky." So who is Becky, and why should we be afraid of her?
So nice to be talking about this in Bethesda. Different from when I talk about it in Prince George's County. So here's the deal. There were 2 documentary filmmakers at that first Bibb reunion, right? And one of them was a woman, 2 white documentary filmmakers, a brother and sister, Jonathan and Rachel Knight. And they were smart and kind and pleasant and very open to me, and kept trying to get to know me, and reached out after the reunion over the years, wanted to hire me as a consultant on their documentary and all of that. Steve jokes because at first I went to the reunion with an attitude like, white folks always asking folks to do something for free that they usually get paid for, right? Then they'd offer to pay me, and I was like, they can't pay me, they can't afford me. And Steve was like, let me get this straight. You were mad when they were not paying you. You're mad because they want to pay you, you know. But it was something different. I was working out this power dynamic. I was working out my place. It was more sort of existential than that. I would not allow myself to get close to Rachel, because if I got close to her, then I would be trying to take care of her. And I couldn't write my truth if I'm taking care of her. If they're taking care of them and I'm taking care of them, who's taking care and writing about the descendants of the enslaved, right? And so that was my approach. And so when I got to this chapter, Beware of Becky, I had already decided that I'm going to just tell all the truths, right? These ghosts aren't coming to me for nothing, wagging their fingers, shaking their chains. I have a line in there where I say, you know, black ghosts, you know, play their records till you just don't want to hear them anymore, right? But I had a charge, and I couldn't tell their story without telling this deeper truth about the history of white women and enslavement, and the ways that has rippled through the culture for generations. Whatever you hear, whatever you think you know, you don't, right? It is a saying. It is something that is whispered in black corners and among black mothers, right? And it needed to be said. And as I was writing, I was mindful of being in a space like this and worrying about hurting people's feelings. But the truth of this history is it's a painful history. The fact that it's only or largely been borne by black folks doesn't mean it's just ours, right? It's just a painful history that hasn't been shared, right? Because of the repercussions of it, because of, you know, our, you know, lack of safety and all of that. And I just, I said in the story and the book, I was here to give everybody their crosses, all their own crosses to bear and their bags to carry. And that's what I did in Beware of Becky, right? So this is a stand-in. It's the same as the Karen meme, and it echoes through time. It's Miss Daisy. You can go back to the reading of the slave narratives, right? And you hear these women talking about white women. 40% of slave owners were white women, right? And that's an underknown sort of statistic. And so, and that continues through the creating of like the women KKK, right? Women did all the organizing and work that they do in all sorts of spaces, right? And they found this proximal power and this adjacent power in white supremacy. And I write about that, and I write about what it means particularly for me having a black athlete son. Yeah.
So
I started out though with Lord of the Rings, which is,
yes,
yeah, so that,
and it comes eventually back.
right.
Lonnae's going to do a short reading from her book, and then we'll take a few questions.
So, I'm starting in a chapter called A Blues Song for Lonnie Gerald. My father's name was Lonnie Gerald O'Neal. He was a police officer in Chicago when he and my mom first migrated from Centralia in southern Illinois up to Chicago, and he was an educator. And the first part of the chapter, I talk about him and my memories of him as very physical. He was an agile. He was a former athlete, and I talk about his physicality and the physicality of the South Side of Chicago, right, which was the whole world to me. And I also talk about his drinking in that. But I say in that chapter, but these were all pictures in motion, and the photo I have in my mind's eye, he is still hazy. Can you all hear me? Okay. Hazy, metaphorical perhaps. It acts as a portrait. Daddy is standing in front of the mirrored floor-to-ceiling panels that cover our living room wall to the right of our picture window. He is facing the camera, but reflected in the glass. Or perhaps it is the other way around. He is facing the mirror, and the camera captures him in full. Daddy wears a full-length gray leather coat with black fur lapels that reach for his shoulders, and thick fur cuffs accentuate his sleeves. He's got the mutton chop sideburns and a full mustache that blends into a well-trimmed goatee. I cannot see his thick curly afro for the wide-brimmed black hat that silos everything underneath in a cone of urban cool. He is tall to my young eyes, at least 6 foot, black, unsmiling. Perhaps it is 1971 and Shaft is in the movie theaters. Maybe Daddy is Richard Roundtree, handsome, authoritative, with a bespoke moral code. A complicated man, and no one understands him but his woman, my mama, Betty Lou. Some elements of this composite sound right on, but I do not think my father is approximating Shaft in that picture. Maybe it's 1972 and Superfly is in the movie theaters. Ron O'Neal is Youngblood Priest. My dad is Ron O'Neal. And this is true, even given the fact that he had a brother, my Uncle Ronnie, who was actually named Ron O'Neal, though Uncle Ronnie had nothing of the Youngblood Priest, the Superfly character in him that I saw. Dad is intense and brooding, but that could just be the in-house version I saw in the picture. Outwardly, he is smiling, quick to laugh hard such that the high notes rise up to fill in the sound of it. A smart brother, a smooth talker. Your money was no good with my daddy, at least not when Lonnie Gerald was paying for the drinks, the food, pulling $20, $50, or $100 bills from a wad of bills, straining, sometimes, the shiny silver money clip he kept in the pocket of his flag brother's pants. Of course, sometimes he'd just talk loud about how he was gonna pay and then slip out the back without doing so. Rise on Fashions. That was the Flag Brothers catalog where the ultra-black men got their Vines, their velvet, their sateen fabrics and platform shoes. For the outspoken few. What was it Mama used to call him? Dark Gable. I know that's right. This is where my daddy's stop on the black Bibb migration train had taken him. Off the plantation, out of Bibbtown, up from Centralia. It was the 1970s. Lonnie Gerald was in Chicago and he was all the way live. At least on the south side, which, along with the west side of the city, was where black folks were allowed to live. The white folks he worked with at the Chicago Transit Authority, at the Chicago Police Department, at the Board of Education in Indiana, wouldn't have known this side of my father. He was trying to make himself into something he didn't have a template for, and America didn't have the tolerance or imagination for, but authentically wanted to be. A smart ass, badass, pretty ass, family having ass, church going ass black man with money. Daddy liked to argue. Fish is not a meat. Also, your good works alone won't get you into heaven. Which is to say, he liked to be right, especially since he had his master's degree. Fifi, a BS degree means bullshit, he explained to me once when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. And an MS, that just means more shit. I think he had been drinking, which was a steady state, or at least much more often than not. He radiated a kinetic disquiet, or at a minimum, an ability to escalate very, very quickly, even as I can see him gesturing widely, slapping backs and grabbing arms when he's laughing in a room where grown folks are partying. But like Ron O'Neal in Superfly, he pimps it. Daddy is light cocoa brown with curly black hair, so it makes sense that he is in the mirror or had just turned from it in the photo. It's like when O'Neal stops in front of the mirror to tell himself that, in addition to his prodigious pusher-man gifts, I'm a pretty nigga too. Uncle Morris's daughter Sharon used to carry Dad's picture in her wallet and tell her friends he was her fiance if she wanted to impress them. Perhaps Daddy was already a school teacher or a bus driver or finishing up his graduate degree during night school. Maybe he was already an assistant principal, or maybe my perception of time was off. Things can get compressed but still make for a clear composite in your mind's eye as a child. For instance, this was around the same era Lonnie Gerald drove a sky blue convertible Cadillac, and the William Devon song, Be Thankful for What You Got, was playing on WVON, AM 1390. I later found out the call letters stood for Voice of the Negro, which sounded about right. Diamond in the back, sun rooftop, digging the scene with the gangster lean, ooh. Sometimes Daddy would pile Mama, me, and my sister and brother into that Cadillac, and we'd go for a drive. This was before power steering, when it took 2 full revolutions of the steering wheel using one finger to make a single left turn. He'd drive the south side with the top down and the radio going. But sometimes we'd go as far as downtown, Grant Park, and the light show at Buckingham Fountain, which in toto might have been the best thing about my childhood.
Thank you. Questions?
We're just like jazz, I know.
Neil?
Did you get put out to the reunion?
Oh. I didn't, but I was not particularly well behaved at that first reunion, I will say that. There came a time, my cousin, the one who I complained about not getting paid and all this stuff, and she facilitated the conversation. And at one point she said, I want to ask the crowd, what would the descendants of the enslaved say to the slave owners if they were here? And I said 2 words. And I meant every bit of them.
The second one was you.
The second one was you. And my cousin whipped her head around, and I just was like, I kept looking straight. I was like, I said what I said, right? And later on, I thought to myself, that wasn't nobody but Susie Bibb O'Neal. You know, giving me her proxy. So I didn't get put out, but I cussed a lot, guys. From beginning to end. There was one point too, there's a Bibb ship. A ship. So mind you, my grandmother grew up poor and hungry, and that rippled through generations. It was the Depression, but what was also happening was wherever black people had jobs, they were losing them, and the jobs were being given to white people, right? They were hungry and they were desperate, and the unions were barred to them and all of this kind of stuff. And so meanwhile, I hear there's a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, you know, SS Bibb or U.S. CG Bibb. And that just sent me over the top. And it was a dry weekend too. I don't even know what would have happened if folks had been drinking, right? And at one point, okay, y'all are just gonna have to forgive me, point of whatever. At one point, one of the filmmakers walked in, and my cousin I'd been sitting there, listening, and she walked in, and she was sitting on the side, and like I said, didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't personal. It was not personal. But she walks in, she's sitting there, and my cousin walks in, and she's asking me to tell her about, well, what is this? Because we're just learning a lot of this history. I was like, it's this, and there was a senator and lettuce, and this bitch got a ship. So, I didn't get put out, but
You were well remembered.
I was well remembered, and I got a lot of grace, right? Which takes something, right? Because it was both deeply personal and it wasn't personal at all. It was everything that they stood for as descendants of the enslaved. And that's why I couldn't get close to them, because I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have thought I should feel that. And then I wouldn't have been able to tell this story. And who's going to speak for the enslaved, right? And anger is human, right? I did go back and apologize.
Other questions?
What part of this story did you have the most difficult time telling, or did you still hold back on?
I didn't hold back on it. From beginning to end, it was just a hard story to tell, right? And so I started, it was a different kind of hard at different times. The first thing I started doing, and if you're ever doing family research, start with the people. The documents will be there. Start with the people. The people die. I've had 4 or 5 people die since I interviewed them, right?
Well, I'll follow up, because you did struggle with the chapter on colorism.
Oh, yeah. Right. I did struggle on that, but before that, I struggled on something else. And some of that was the family stories. And basically, I'm telling these family stories, and a lot of them, it's a lot of trauma. The trauma just ripples through a lot of families. We definitely had our fair share of it. And I'm listening to them struggle with things that they're trying to make sense of in their own lives, right? And they're just telling their little part of it, but I'm hearing from everybody. And I'm thinking to myself, and they're like, this doesn't make sense, and they're agonizing. And I'm like, thinking to myself, it don't make sense because your daddy ain't your daddy, like you don't have the full story. But it wasn't my story to tell then, right? I'm telling the overarching it. People have enough of their own breadcrumbs, whether or not they want to follow it up. So they were looking for meaning, but they didn't want to go deep enough, and just holding those stories. I did struggle with colorism. That's a chapter in there, because it's just not something, it's house business, it's family business, right? And to say it, and I'm not going to look at Deb Hurd, because I know how she feels about house business. Right. But if I'm talking about things that echo through generations and leave a legacy and a mark and a scar, then that is one of them, right? It's an intra-family sort of a conversation, but it also plays out in really interesting ways, in that I found a scholar, Ellis Monk from Harvard, who had done this sort of regression of perceptions of conventional attractiveness to reward, to educational attainment, to finances, economics, and all of that. And he detailed the ways that, and when he's looking at perception of conventional attractiveness, the number one marker of that worldwide is skin color. Skin color, hair, body type, he categorized it and he quantified all of these, right? And so he talked about how what can get coded as preference or culture or sexual attraction actually takes on a structural character, right? It's all the breaks that go your way. It's all the benefits of the doubt that you get. And they go your way simply because someone can relate to the way you look, right? And so I struggled with that, because anything that sounds like you're trying to distance yourself from Black people which is what colorism does, right? When you're talking about being light-skinned in certain spaces, everybody has stories. Well, everybody has stories, period. But it can be particularly perilous as a light-skinned person because it can be perceived as distancing. And I had to come to terms with, well, what do you do with this? And it occurred to me like, well, it's like any unearned privilege, right? You use it for the benefit of your people, right? If a door opens for you, you leave it open for the people coming behind you, or you open it wider, or you take that unearned privilege and you make something of it, right? But it's not encoded as unearned privilege. It's encoded as all the things you did right? And which is also something we always want to believe in. So I really had to interrogate that. And I started not to watch it, not to write it. And I think I was telling Steve, I was certainly telling another editor friend that I was talking to. I was like, I'm not going to do a colorism story. I said, chapter, I don't think I have any stories to tell. She was like, really? Do you not have any stories, or are you afraid to tell them? And I was indeed afraid. I was afraid writing this entire book from beginning to end.
I think we got time for one more. Last question?
Oh,
Over here.
yeah,
What part of the book was your favorite to write?
what part was my favorite? Well, don't tell my editor, but the Bibb lettuce part was really that was a one-take thing. I breezed through that aisle. At one point, I'm reading off all these musical vinaigrettes, and something was like, such and such, and it was described as herbaceous, and I started going like this. I said, I'm herbaceous, right? Like, I just had so much fun writing about it, tasting it, getting, indulging this non-existent foodie part of myself. So that was really a lot of fun. And there were others. Music is sprinkled throughout, and it's interesting trying to evade the censors, more editors, when you're trying to put music in there and just like a reference that you need, you hear in your head. But they just see a lawsuit. So writing about a lot of the musical stuff was good, and reconnecting with family. It was painful in a lot of ways, and it was good, and it was necessary, right? So, and the ghosts have calmed down, so that's good for now.